Good afternoon. It's January 15th, 10:28 p.m. My name is Anthony. I've been working in the AI industry for around coming on to a decade now. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about project management, especially if you're a solo dev or you're building a POC or side to side project. I've just finished a nice chunk of work, and the question always comes up when I do this in the back of my mind: what do I do next? Don't get me wrong, I have a to do list, I have like a set of things that need to get done, but I wanted to just talk about how I formulate that. And I sometimes will come and change that. And so, like, the framework I use, or just at least the thinking patterns I use to go about creating that. So, the first is whenever you're creating a side project, I like to always start at the problem. And this is going to sound really basic, but bear with me. This needs to be said because I'm going to keep referring back to it. But you start at the problem, right? So if you're making a chat GPT wrapper sort of SaaS app for people that want to learn how to socialize. I just saw, I think, this video about this guy that's doing that. And you want to remember what's the problem you're solving, right? Like, the problem you're solving isn't having an app that you can talk to. It's helping people learn how to socialize. Why does that matter? Because that changes how you market it. That changes how you think about it, and the actual like solution should be completely oriented around that. How the UI is surfaced. The type of people that you're targeting. I'll come back to that in a second. So, once you understand the problem that you're solving and you're now creating the SaaS around it, or this solution around it, doesn't have to be a SaaS. The first thing I do is define your MVP, which is super obvious, but I think the not obvious, or at least maybe it is obvious, just nobody ever does it, is you have to be extremely ruthless about what's gonna make it into the MVP. And you have to be completely okay with not doing things right. I think this is where so many engineers, especially engineers, I'm really talking to you guys, because by trade we're taught to be correct and methodical, and you know you never want to have dirty code because somebody's going to look at your PR funny, and then you're going to be known as the world's worst developer, and the world's going to end. But when you're starting out, especially on something like this, no, your customer doesn't care about how nice your code is. All they care is if it solves their problem. And you don't know if it solves their problem until you get in front of them. And so you really want to be ruthless with your MVP. And then when you're ruthless, that also means with how you go about building it. Where can you cheat? Where can you cut corners? I read this one book which told this awesome story about there was this hotel chain, or like this actually, it wasn't a hotel chain. There was this robotics company that wanted to sell something to a hotel chain, and the MVP that they had in mind was going to take months to do properly. They were going to build a robot that could be able to navigate from the lobby all the way up to the rooms in order to give customers, towels or whatever they want. And the timeline for this was going to be obviously months, because there's a lot in it. There's a Roomba technology in there. There's figuring out communicating with the people at the front, and then the customers. How do you properly knock on the door? A bunch of problems. And what they ended up doing was restricting themselves to have 1 week to complete it. And with that 1 week, they had to cut every single corner imaginable. And what they ended up doing was just remote control teleopping the robot, forget all the AI, forget all the fancy stuff, and forget even going to the lobby to do it, because the people at the front may not be the actual bottleneck. It really matters is, does the customer feel like this is an elevated experience? Is this better for the customer, right? And so they remote controlled it, brought it to the customer, and it was all fine and dandy. And all that to say that instead of taking months to do something right, they did it in a week, but they found out way more, and the ROI on their time was just significantly higher. So be ruthless, cut corners where you have to, which takes you to step 2, which is to stop coding. For the love of God, stop coding. Once you have that MVP, you're going to be embarrassed. You're going to hate everything about it. You're going to know that there's all these corners that you cut and things are going to break, and things will be broken and they will break. And that's okay. Sometimes at least you need to be functional. Functional enough to put it in your target avatar customer's hand and see if it solves their problem. And this is where you should just spend all your time trying to get your customer. You can call it marketing, you can call it sales, whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Just get some people to try it out, and you'll get maybe a little bit of signal if they are just trying it out, but they're not paying for it, and a lot more if they're paying for it, because that means they're intentional about, like, they have a cost to actually using the product. Having said that, if you know they experience the problem, whatever the problem is, let's say my problem is I can't get to the store fast. If you give me a car, even if I don't pay for the car, if you put me in a car and you get me there in 3 minutes, it's an obvious signal that it solves my problem to an extent. Now you have the business problem of, like, okay, how much am I willing to pay for that and all that. But figure out a way to get a customer, hopefully and ideally paying, but if not, just somebody that has the problem that you're trying to solve. And if that means you have to read a book on marketing, go door to door, then do that. There's actually somebody I just talked to recently that did something so awesome, which is they would go to public spaces and based off the activity that the solution they were selling, and they would just talk to people there, and they ended up selling that SaaS and exiting pretty well. And it was just such a inspiring story of, like, how scrappy you really can be when you're first trying to get your target customers, your initial customers at least. And then with those initial customers, you just get feedback. You get signal of, like, okay, how well did it solve their problem? What were the friction points? How do we know it's solving their problem? Like, what's the feedback loop? There's so many things that you're not even going to have thought of that will percolate to the top of your mind immediately, that will surface because you've seen it in action in real life. And then after that, you just repeat. You can, for the engineers, you can go back to your coding once you have this. You go ruthlessly define your MVP and then start coding again, which is great, or building. But then you just repeat the cycle. You get more customers the next time on the next iteration. You just keep doing this until you get to this point where the solution is a very obvious, whatever the problem is, like a very obvious time saver, a very obvious, like, solution to a problem that doesn't exist elsewhere, or for some reason the barrier of entry is lower through your solution. And I mean, there's a whole other marketing angle to this, which is, like, sometimes it doesn't even need to necessarily be better if you're better at marketing. But I expect I'm talking to engineers now, so I don't expect people watching this video to be necessarily good at marketing. I know it's a different side of the coin of a business than us engineers are used to. All right, that was really it. One thing I actually wanted to talk to regarding the first iteration of the cycle was the MVP. So I heard this really cool phrase, which is if you're, or I guess a story, if you're trying to build a monkey dancing on a stool, there's 2 ways you can go about it. The first is you can make sure you have a perfect stool so that when the monkey starts moving around, it won't fall. It's stable enough, and there's enough surface area that the monkey can do all sorts of dance moves. But then you eventually have to come to reality with the fact that you now have to get a monkey to dance, and you have to train it to dance. And that story is supposed to illustrate that the other approach, which is do the problem that you don't know how you're going to do. And so we're kind of diving into not just defining the MVP, but building the actual MVP. So this is within step 1, or after step 1, so once you've defined your MVP, how do you actually get there within that, the time between actually delivering on that MVP? You pick the unknowns, the big hairy problems you don't know how you're going to solve, not the REST endpoints that you've done a million times, or I mean, with Claude Code and all these agents, to be honest, a lot of code is now been like, the solutions are now there, but there's probably a big hairy problem you don't know how you're going to solve. Attack that one first, because if you can't solve that, everything else is useless, and so you're saving yourself time. In other words, just figure out what is the unknown in terms of your competence and just go after that. And then the thing I like to do secondly is figure out whatever move. You're going to have a couple potential tasks to do, and you're trying to figure out how to order them. Whatever move will allow you to move faster. And so I'm really happy. I just did evals. I set evals up about like a week ago on this project that I'm working on, because once I did that, I was immediately able to swap out this more agentic loop like I was talking about earlier and just validate that all the changes worked. That avoided a bunch of vibe code testing, or sorry, not vibe code, but vibe testing that would have had to gone on for who knows how long. Instead, it was, I have a very comprehensive test suite, and I have also evals now that can confirm things are working how they should be. And so evals, in my mind, was one of the first things to attack in this current next iteration cycle that I'm working on for the next version, or the next MVP, or the next feature, whatever you want to call it. And the last thing I would say is, which is not like the optimal approach, but in some ways it is, which is to work on what's sometimes most interesting to you. Especially if you're on like a solo project, it can sometimes be long and lonely as far as like the amount of time you have to work on something. And every once in a while, it will be motivating to just work on the part of the project that makes you most excited. However, careful about how much you do that, because you might just end up doing a bunch of things you're comfortable with and not actually eventually come to the monkey dancing that you have to teach, and you can't figure out a way to do it. So be careful with that. And then along that note, something that I've really enjoyed doing this past 3 months is making my code base a pleasure to work with. And so what that really means is writing really nice tests that allow me to continue moving fast. This isn't about which feature you work on, but just as you're going through, once you're past 1 or 2 MVP or like iteration cycles, and you have more confidence in the problem you're building, if you want to keep moving faster, don't forget about tests. I know that's like such a cliche. It's just so true. It's just so true. But yeah, that's everything I have to say about that. Hopefully this helps somebody. If not, I know it helps me, and that's enough. I will see you guys tomorrow.